One of the most important and most challenging elements of being a leader is really understanding and being able to align an organizational culture with the values of that culture. So I want to share some thoughts with you about how we can align organizational culture, and beginning really with what is organizational culture. So let's take a look at the concept. First of all, let's start with the question of what is leadership. Leadership is a social influence process that's directed towards the accomplishment of goals. And what's most important to understand about it is that leadership is something that happens in moments. It is time bound. Think of it as a chain of leadership moments where you're influencing others to get things done. And each moment leads to the next moment. So maybe you're greeting somebody as they come into work and trying to give them some excitement and energy for the day, and then you're drawing people into a meeting and conducting that meeting, and each of those is a different leadership moment that gives you an opportunity to manifest your leadership a little bit differently, but at the same time, hopefully consistently and effectively across those moments. Now, if we take those moments and we break them down into their critical component, every leadership moment has a basic anatomy. In every leadership moment, there's a leader, someone who is trying to influence someone else to accomplish a goal. There's a follower, someone who is receiving that influence. Now, it's important to realize that the leader and the follower do not necessarily have to be positional. Sometimes the follower positionally is the person who is engaging in the influence and is therefore the leader in that moment. That's just important to remember. But there's always a leader influencing someone to accomplish a goal and a follower receiving that influence. The leader uses a process of influence, an approach that tries to accomplish the goal that they're trying to accomplish through that influence of the other. And because there is interaction between the leader and follower, there's always a relationship that shapes the nature of that influence and helps to determine how effective it will be. All of this takes place within a context, and that context helps to shape the moment. If I'm in one cultural context, say Germany versus Ecuador, I'm going to engage in leadership a little bit different based on the culture of that context and some of the demands that the context places on that leadership moment. And then, of course, the leadership moment is bound by time. There's a time-bound element to it as we engage in one leadership moment and then move to the next. But it's important to recognize that, because recognizing what makes up a leadership moment helps us to be more intentional about how we approach them in terms of the goal, the process, the relationship we're trying to build, understanding of the context. So that's critical to understand. Now, as a leader, we are creating kind of our leadership chain, right? Each moment by moment, we create a chain of interaction that leads to that leadership style and approach that we take. Our culture in the organization is a combination of everybody's leadership influence chains. As leaders interact with followers and followers interact with customers and engage in influence one with another, they create chains of influence that resonate throughout the organization. And to the extent that there's consistency in the way that those interactions take place, the culture begins to form in a consistent way. If there's inconsistency, then the culture begins to form in an inconsistent way. So who we are as a leader is a product of each of our leadership moments and how they create our leadership style over time. Who we are as an organization in terms of our culture is a product of all of the leadership moments of everyone within the context and how they shape the culture over time. So let's explore a little bit more about what culture is. Culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions that a group has learned as it solved problems over time. In other words, groups come together, problems emerge, and so they take an approach to solving that problem. And that approach that they take then, as it becomes a basic foundation for how they will solve problems in the future. And as they continue to do that, they continue to develop ways of engaging in the world. In other words, what they develop is a system of shared assumptions, values, and beliefs that indicate what is appropriate behavior within that organization and ultimately what is not. And that's a result of past behaviors that were successful and came to be valued in the organization. So culture is the system of shared assumptions, values, and beliefs that leads to outcomes in the organization. Now, if we want to understand culture, Edgar Schein proposed that culture existed at 3 key levels within organizations. The first level is the symbolic manifestations and operating procedures. And that includes everything that actually exists within the organization. The organizational documents, the stories people tell about good employees, bad employees, the rituals and ceremonies, the artifacts, policies, procedures, management styles. Everything within the culture is an artifact that has some kind of a value. Now, underneath those artifacts are the espoused values, the conscious explanations of why things are important. This person was a great employee in this organization. Well, then we explain why. Well, because they did these certain things. What's important to recognize, though, is that there is a deeper level of culture, and this one's critical. Unconscious beliefs, values, and thoughts. These are, as it says, unconscious. We often don't stop and think about them or are even aware of them, but they actually drive our behavior. And this is why in some organizations we sometimes see gaps between the espoused values and the way people are actually acting, because there's unconscious underlying beliefs and values that are actually driving and shaping their behavior. So when we talk about the strength of a culture, we can say that a culture is strong when it has 3 core characteristics. 1, cohesiveness. There are actual shared assumptions, beliefs, norms, and values in the organization. Commitment. People are truly committed to those values, beliefs, and living them in the organization. And because of that commitment, they actually manifest those values, beliefs, and assumptions in the way that they engage in the practices, policies, patterns of behavior, evaluation within the culture. And so those are the keys to having a strong culture. So if you stop and think about it, if you go to the UMGC website and you look at what's on the website, you will see cultural elements. University of Maryland Global Campus. You'll see Succeed Again with a UMGC online program. You'll see the UMGC Learning Management System. All of these things are symbolic manifestations that indicate something about the underlying values of the organization and what they are most proud of. So if you think about your own organization, what are the most meaningful symbols and operating procedures? What are you most proud of in that organization? Now, as you identify those symbolic manifestations, those operating procedures and symbols and all of those kinds of things, then you can ask the question, what values do these reflect? What values should drive everything that we do, right? These are our espoused values. And so organizations often espouse things like trust and teamwork and responsibility. And then the question becomes, to what extent is there an alignment between these espoused values and the actual practices? If we claim we value the customer, do we manifest that? Do we manifest it in such a way that the customer feels that we value them? That is the congruence that we're looking for between these core espoused values and the actual operating procedures. But beneath that are the underlying assumptions, the beliefs that actually drive behavior. So there are many organizations that, yes, they say they value their customers, but at a deeper level, they actually don't like their customers very much, or they feel like the customers are a little bit of an annoyance to them. And that underlying feeling or belief or assumption actually leaks into and drives behavior without them necessarily being aware of it, because they're not going to go around telling people, I don't really like my customers very much. But you may find people actually acting that way because of underlying assumptions, beliefs, feelings, values that are shaping their behavior at a subconscious level and creating incongruencies in the way that they lead. And what that leads to is cultures where certain values are being espoused. We're a family here. We love our customers. But to the individuals in the organization, working for the organization or serving as customers to the organization, their actual experience may be very different from what the organization claims. They may say, yes, we're a family, but it's a very dysfunctional family. So then how do we lead a culture? This is important. If you want to lead the culture effectively, the first thing you have to do is define the values. And this is where a lot of organizations actually stop. They define a set of values and then they use them as a marketing tool to try to communicate something about themselves, but they don't take the next step. The next step, once you've defined your values, is to align your values. To ask yourself, what do we need to do differently in terms of our symbolic manifestations and operating procedures to really live those values? And so you begin to actually strive to really live those values. Then, once you've done that surface level kind of alignment, the next step is to begin to really challenge assumptions, to start looking deeper at what's underneath so that you can then deepen that alignment. So, for example, right now there's a lot of discussion around the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so you see organizations saying, we value diversity, and then trying to align those values by saying, okay, how can we hire more people with diverse backgrounds, and how can we demonstrate more value for individuals of diversity? But then if we want to go deeper, we have to start challenging assumptions. We have to start asking the questions. Are we just doing diversity because it's a hot topic or it's politically correct right now? Why do we want to do diversity? What is the real value of diversity? And you push to really kind of identify those deep assumptions, because many organizations are doing it because it's politically correct, because it's the thing to do right now. And they haven't really started to ask the question of, why do we really want to do diversity? Because if you really ask that question and you really go deep with that and you start to answer that in some significant ways, you can then deepen that alignment. We really want to do diversity because we really believe that when individuals come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, they have more to offer to the organization. So then you start asking the question, okay, if we really believe that deeper value, how will we align around that? And that can then drive you to deeper levels of cultural alignment and consistency, especially as you then look at how do we incorporate those values into our strategic direction, our processes, the way we measure and reward people, the people that we hire and how we train and develop them, and the structures and the way that we go about making decisions. And so culture then becomes the central element for driving all of the behavioral aspects of the organization, not just at that espoused values level, but at the deeper level of assumptions and beliefs that ultimately drive behavior. So as you're going about doing that, one way of kind of approaching that is to say, first of all, what are the espoused values that we have within the culture? And then to honestly ask the question, what evidence is there that we are living these values? And then what gaps exist between the values, policies, procedures, and behaviors? Be honest with yourself, because you will find gaps. There are no organizations that are perfect in living their values. And in fact, I think most organizations need to regularly come back and revisit the values and ask themselves, where are we out of alignment? Where could we do better? And then, of course, the big question, what would have to change in terms of behaviors for true alignment at the deeper level between values, deeper assumptions, and behaviors? What would have to change for that true alignment to occur in leaders as individuals and in the organization as an overall structure and culture of itself? And then we have to take action. Who's going to do what, when, how, in order to create that greater alignment? What contingencies will we put in place in case things don't go as planned as we're moving forward with it? And what are the outcomes that we want to see from that alignment, and how will we measure those outcomes? So, key questions then for ongoing culture. Who is responsible for leading cultural alignment? If there's not somebody in the organization who has responsibility, it's not going to happen. To whom do they report? How often do they meet to plan and evaluate? How do they enlist and involve others? And what resources exist to support these efforts? These are the critical things when it comes to being able to understand and lead culture. And I hope this gives you a good foundation for being able to do some of this work yourself.